In Chapter 5, we're going to talk about quality food production standards. In this chapter, you should be able to describe basic concerns in establishing quality standards, explain sustainability and farm-to-fork concerns, describe how to determine menu item quantities and labor hours needed for production shifts, and indicate necessary instructions to production staff, explain how food production methods enhance quality, identify food safety concerns that must be addressed as food quality standards are implemented, identify supervision procedures during production that address quality and other concerns, and describe the quality concerns when considering types of convenience food and when developing production procedures to enhance nutrition. So let's talk about establishing quality standards. This is one of the most important things that you can do in a restaurant or any kind of other environment, whether you're in construction or you're in marketing or you're in the restaurant industry or the lodging industry. Establishing quality standards is the most important thing that you can do for your customer and for your employees. But why is this such a hard thing? And it's because the concept of quality is hard to define. Some managers and customers simply perceive that a product or service is or is not proper quality. They may decide that that server that's waiting on you is not well trained, although they could be the most highly trained individual in the group, just maybe having a bad day, or you might not understand what they're asking of you. So that it's a bit of an ephemeral quality when you're dealing with that. Production planning is made easier when the standards are in place ahead of time. This includes things like the menu has been planned to meet target customers' food preferences. We want to know exactly what it is our customers are desirous of. Standardized recipes are in place to provide food quality and portion sizes that represent value at the menu's selling price. If it's overvalued, if it's overpriced, we don't necessarily want to buy it. We see a steak valued at $35 for just a steak. We may assume that that is out of our value range, especially if it's a lesser cut of meat. Food purchase specifications define the food quality requirements of ingredients purchased. We want to make sure that the quality of those ingredients are to our specifications and nothing less than our specifications. When we talk about quality and environmental concerns, the biggest thing that's going to come to mind is the idea of sustainability. These are activities including water conservation, energy efficiency, and recycling that can lessen an operation's impact on the environment. When we think about water conservation, we have to know where our usages of water are in the kitchen. For instance, kitchen and dishwashing makes up 52% of our water use in restaurants. That includes everything from washing pots and pans to glasses to silverware and plateware, but also things like hand washing, thawing things under running water. When you thaw things under running water, you don't need the water running like a full-on valved open sink. You need just a trickle of water coming through there, just enough to keep the water refreshed. Also things like in the cooking process themselves, steaming and sauteing and all these other things, boiling, all of these things are going to take some form of water usage in the process. Then we see other areas that we have, like in the restrooms, 31% of our water usage in there. I don't know if you're familiar with how inefficient most toilets are, but they're using 2 to 3 gallons of flush. So what can you do? In the kitchen, it's hard to cut back on water use, but you can add things like low flow toilets. The landscaping, you can water with low flow valves. Cooling and heating, not a lot you can do in water conservation there because it doesn't use a lot of water, but there are other applications which you can search out and find different water areas. Same thing with energy conservation. In the cooking process is going to be the biggest part of our energy, and we're including electrical and gas in that. Gas is predominantly the main source of energy for restaurants, but also in heating and cooling. We use a lot of energy to refrigerate our product, especially dishwashing. Those three things combined, cooking, heating, and cooling, and dishwashing, that's going to be the bulk of your electrical usage in the restaurant. There are some areas that you can improve on that using things like refrigeration that is UL listed and is not heavy usage of energy. There's smart refrigerators and things along those lines. But typically you don't see that in a commercial setting as much as you see that in residential setting. Lighting, however, is an area we can definitely make improvements on. We can move this needle quite a bit by replacing our inefficient fluorescent lighting with high efficiency LED lighting. Yes, there is an expense up front, but it will take care of itself in less than a year. It'll pay itself off, if not half a year. It will pay itself off in energy conservation. Same thing in the walk-in coolers. Replace high inefficient regular bulbs with high efficiency LED bulbs. You'll use a lot less wattage, which also means a lot less heat energy put out because a lot of your walk-in cooler is fighting against the heat energy of the light bulbs. Something you probably didn't know. I found out the hard way. Never put a 100-watt light bulb in a refrigeration unit and think that that's not going to raise the temperature of the walk-in cooler. Also, things like recycling. You know, depending on where you live, you may have a robust recycling program. When I was up in New York State, we had recycling. We had to separate our refuse from our paper and plastic, from our glass to our general compostable materials. So we had 4 bins in every kitchen, different colors. Farm to fork sustainability. When we talk about the idea of farm to fork, we're really talking about local. We're talking about keeping things local in the process. This is describing the flow of food through the stages of growing and harvesting, storing, processing, packaging, and preparation. In other words, we want this path to be as close to the source as possible. There are often some benefits to this. You may have fresher foods that come from this with less processing. You can offer purchased cost effectively at this point. So instead of having the shipping cost built into it, which in many cases is a lot, you can get more cost effective pricing because of it. The support of family farming and local economy is something to consider, always to consider, because a lot of local farmers are being pushed out by conglomerates. And if you can buy locally, that's going to feed that back into the economy. There's a lot of appreciation for this within the industry, but also customers are looking for this now. It's a selling point on your menu that you are farm to fork sustainable or farm to table sustainable. Part of this is you want to do a make or buy analysis. And this is basically looking at your items and determining whether you want to make it or you want to buy it. Caesar dressing is a great example of that. I make an awfully mean Caesar dressing. I really do. But there's also a lot of really good Caesar dressings on the market that don't involve me using up labor hours to make. And they taste almost as good, if not better, than the one I make. So you have to balance that. What's your labor going to cost you to make that product versus is it really a convenience or not a convenience? Production planning. The first thing we have to do in production planning is we need to determine menu item quantities. This is basically deciding how much of a product we need to make on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. It also gives us an idea of once we do that, we know how much to order. So it's a very big part of that. And the way we go about doing that is we use production forecasts. So we look at our past sales trends to determine these forecasts. So this is an example of menu item sales history. We call this a P mix or a product mix, or it may be referred to as a menu mix. Either way we look at this, we can look at this from the most minute aspect, or we can get macro with it. So for instance, we may only want to look at this past Tuesday from 2 to 4 p.m. Or maybe we want to look at, like in this case, all of last Monday's sales. So for instance, let's take strip steaks. We look at our last Monday's sales of 24. We average out the prior 5 Mondays sales and we have 21. Okay, well now we're starting to drill down on some information. We look at our average daily sales last week, we had 18. Our average daily sales last month, we had 19. So by looking at these numbers, I'm seeing an increase as it goes up. So basically what this is telling me is I should expect an increase in sales in strip steaks. Again, we look at current sales trends. This past sales information should be compared to recent sales data. Don't negate your recent sales data. History is great to have, and it will tell you a lot. But unless you put it in context with your current sales trends, I know that on the last 50 Fridays that I'm going to do this amount on average. But what that doesn't tell me is it doesn't tell me that there is a event coming up in downtown that's going to block access to my restaurant. So now I know that I'm going to be down in sales for that particular day. So these are some things that you have to keep in mind. Also, future sales trends. You're going to have to predict some sales trends in the future. And this is one of the most difficult things because it's almost like a flip of the coin, a 50-50 in some cases. But you can do this using your history, using your regressive line. You can even do, if you're familiar with regression, data regression through statistics, through Excel, you can even predict some sort of closeness. Again, it's a prediction. Again, we look at the example of the history, those strip steaks that we saw earlier with last Monday sales of 24, average Monday sales of the last 5 Mondays are 21, our average weekly sales last week was 18, our average weekly sales last month was 19. So we can reasonably predict that we're going to need to bump up our production of those strip steaks. In this case, they call for 25, which is about where I was landing earlier with that. Determining labor hours. This is a big portion of your budget. You have 2 main portions of your budget. One is going to be food cost. The other is going to be labor cost. Together, these are called prime cost. The first step in this process is to determine how much money can be spent. So bear with me a little bit. There's a little bit of math here. We're going to work through it. It's not as complicated as it sounds. So the first thing we have to determine is our average daily wage. How much money do we have to spend on average in that day? Let's say, for instance, our June labor budget for waged employees, we're talking about hourly employees, not salaried employees. Our June labor budget is $38,900. We divide that by 30 days in June, and that's going to give us $1,295, roughly rounded up, average daily wage. That's how much we can spend on a day in average daily wages. Average wage hours per day. We're going to take our average daily wage, which is $1,295. We're going to divide that by an average hourly wage. Let's say our average hourly wage is $15 per hour. This is how much we add up all of our employees' pay rate and we divide it by the number of employees. And we got $15 per hour. This is going to give us 86 average waged hours per day. Now this is hours, 86 hours that we have to budget in that one day. That means if I've got one person working 5 hours, another person working 10 hours, that's 15 hours right there. Average wage hours per week. We're going to take our 86 average wage hours per day and we're going to multiply that times 7 days a week. We're open 7 days a week. If you're only open 6 days a week, it would be multiplied times 6 days a week. And that's going to give us a total of 602 average waged hours per week. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't take into consideration Your sales volume. Monday sales are not the same as Friday sales. So I can't just say, okay, I'm going to plug in 86 hours on Monday and 86 hours on Friday, and I'm not going to have I can promise you, I'm not going to have a very effective shift on Friday. I'm going to have people standing around on Monday, and I'm going to have people running their head off on Friday. So really, I need to do it by percentages. Here's an example of a weekly projection calculator. This is used whenever you have to take into consideration percentages when you're dealing with determining your weekly budgeting for sales, for food cost percentages, for labor cost, and such. So the way this works is we're going to enter in our weekly sales projection. Let's say, for instance, we did our math and we're looking at our history from the last 5 years for this week during the month of September. And we come up with a weekly projection of $50,000. So that's how much we anticipate that we're going to sell in the restaurant over the course of the week. You know what? I'm going to shoot the moon. Let's say $250,000. Because we're a real restaurant, we're making some money. That's a lot, but you'll get the idea. So our average wage rate here, I calculate all my salaried employees separately from my waged employees. What we're looking for here is average wage rate for waged employees, not for your salaried employees. That's a little different calculation. They get taken into the P&L a little bit differently. So I take all of my waged employees, I add them up, and I divide by the number of employees that I've got. And I come up with an average daily rate of, let's say, $17 because I pay a little higher. Okay, so now that you've done that, that's an easy part that you can do ahead of time. Doesn't take much trouble to get that involved. So we're going to enter in our percentages of sales here. So we need to know how much of our weekly sales we do on Monday, we do on Tuesday, and such and such and such. We do this by our history. We found this out previously. So we know by looking at our past times, we can calculate this with a pretty good certainty, actually. So let's say that on Monday we do 10% of our weekly sales, Tuesday we do about 10%, and Wednesday we do about 10% as well. On Thursday we start getting much busier, we do about 20%. Friday we do 25%. On Saturday we do maybe a little bit less, 20% of our weekly sales there. And on Sunday, it's a slow day. We only do 5% of our weekly sales on Sunday. So now we've got our total sales here. It's going to tell us what our daily sales estimates are. For Monday, it's 25,000. For Friday, it's 62,500. This is what we need to be able to determine and forecast for labor cost and food cost very effectively, because if we don't have this accurate information, then all of a sudden now we're just kind of guessing at how many people to put on the clock. So we also go down here and we're going to add in our food cost percentages. Now this is a fairly fixed number. We know that we're going to run a little bit higher food cost on the weekend because steaks are going to be more common on the weekend. So we want to try and run a little bit lower food cost during the week. Let's say, for instance, during the week, we run a 30% food cost, 30s all the way around. And on Friday, we know we're going to run a little bit higher. So we go to a 32% food cost. Saturday, probably the same. And then Sunday, we want to knock it down a little bit. We want to try and run a 29% food cost. This gives us our average food cost of about 30% for the whole week, which is good. Our labor percentage is also one of those things that we've determined ahead of time because we know how much percentage-wise we need to plug in labor on those days. We know that on Monday, we only need about a 15% labor. So we need to run as lean as we possibly can on these days, because once we get to the weekend, we're going to need some extra people on the clock. Now, sales fixes a lot of things. The more people you have on the clock, the more sales you need, and vice versa. The more sales you have, the more people on the clock you need. So here you would think that we're going to run a higher labor cost, but in reality, what we end up doing is running a little bit lower labor cost because the sales drives the labor cost down. So we end up running about a 14% And then here we're going to run about a 12 or 13% labor and about a 12 or 13% labor here as well. And then on Sunday is going to be really hard to predict. We want to try and keep it as low as possible to finish off the week strong. We want to do a 13% labor here. This is going to be a slow day, so we're going to cut as many people off the clock as we can. So now we've got all of our numbers calculated for us. We know how many labor hours to plug in on a daily basis. We know how many labor dollars that attributes to. We know what our prime cost is, because prime cost, if you remember, is our food cost plus our labor cost. That's going to give us our prime cost percentage. It's going to give us our prime cost dollars, and then it's going to give us our weekly sales on it. This is another one of those things that I'm going to give you guys in the supplemental that you can keep forever and ever. Once I get all of my information, figure out how many hours to schedule, then I'm going to plug it into a master schedule. Now, this master schedule doesn't include anyone's names. It's positions only. And it allows me to do this for every day of the week. I would create a master schedule for every day of the week, so I know exactly what positions need to be filled and when. And a lot of times I'm going to overlap or stagger in positions. I don't necessarily need everybody there at 8 a.m. I just need a couple of people, and then I'm going to bring people in as needed during the course of the day. I'm also going to let them get out of there as needed during the course of the day. So if they came in at 8 a.m., they'll leave at 1 p.m. If they came in at 9 a.m., they'll leave at 2 p.m. That way we've got staggered amounts of coverage during the day. Once we develop our master schedule and our crew schedule, and we finally get it all out there, and of course someone's going to have a problem with it, we're going to have to redo it and redo it and redo it. Sometimes we have to redo it all the way up until the day before. Hopefully we don't. But now we need to worry about making sure that our staff is informed, well informed, particularly about what's going to happen during the course of the day. So we have before shift instructions. This may take the form of a lineup meeting. We want to get all of our employees together, or we do it separate in different areas. Maybe we have a front of the house and a back of the house line up separately, or we have a collective lineup. The idea is the lineup shouldn't take any more than 5 or 10 minutes at most. A lot of restaurants, they'll have sit down lineups and it takes 30 minutes. It's too long. You need to be standing up 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you're out of there. I always like to make sure that if there's a special, that they taste it. You got to be careful about that, because I actually had a server stab me in the arm with a fork one time because they were getting a little too aggressive about that whole tasting thing. But I like to make sure that I cover all the different aspects of what's going on that night. Is there a party? Is there something that the staff needs to know about? Is there a special? Is there something that's on limited count? Maybe there's an event in town they don't know about. So these are all the different things that you should cover really, really quickly in your staff meetings. You should also talk about your daily sales forecast. First off, you should have a daily sales forecast. You should know how much that you're going to project to do that evening, not only by day, but by hour. You can break it down by hour using your history. And then just basically having your mise en place together. One of the ways that we can do that is through having production sheets or prep sheets. This is an example of a prep sheet. It's a relatively stripped down basic prep sheet. You've got your item listed. You've got a spot for filling in your own hand. You've got a par level for Monday through Thursday, and a par level for Friday through Saturday, and then initials of who did it. Here's another version of a production plan. So this tells you here that we know that 85% of our breakdown for proteins are going to be in strip steaks. So that means that we should prepare 70 of them. Okay. That gives us space for how many we sold, for how many we have left over at the end of the day. So this is one way of looking at it. Now, these are all great. These are all good. These are from the book. I'm going to show you mine. This is what I use on a daily basis whenever I do prep. This is my version of a weekly prep list. It's something I've created, which I'll link into the course supplementals for this particular module as well. As you can see, I start by putting my date in here. Today's date is, we'll say yesterday was 9/26, and it's immediately going to populate all the other dates, so you don't have to worry about that. You just put in your first date, boom, done. And then I go in and I do an actual physical count of what I have on hand. That's the very first thing I do in the morning. I count my New York strips, and I've got 10 of those. Punch that in, it tells me I need to prep 10. I've got ribeyes, I've got 5 ribeyes, I need to prep 15. I've got 0 fillets, I need to prep 15 of those. I've got sirloins, 2 of those, I need to prep 8. And then my flat iron steaks, I've got 1 of those, I need to prep 9. So now I've got all of my prep ready to go on here. I know exactly what I've got to do. Once I get it done, I can put a check mark next to it. I can slash through it. I can do whatever I want to indicate that it's done. And then I can save that and move on. It's taking the par, which is the amount that your absolute amount that you should have on hand. And then it's subtracting out what you do have on hand. So if it says that I need 20, then I'm going to take the 10 out that I don't need, and that tells me I need 10 more. You can organize it by categories, or you can literally go top to bottom, left to right in your prep list. It doesn't matter, but this will be linked in your core shell, so you can keep that forever and ever and ever.